And good morning to everybody else joining us from other parts of the world. We're very happy to be welcoming you in the first plenary meeting of this week. We are in the second week of our annual meeting for the Global Shelter Cluster. So my name is Ela Sardaroğlu. I'm very happy to be welcoming you on behalf of the Global Shelter Cluster. I'm the cluster coordinator on behalf of the IFRC and also on behalf of Brett Moore, my co-lead at UNHCR, and the entire support team. We're very happy to welcome you in this session, which is called Greening the Response. And we look forward to a very fruitful discussion in the coming hour and a half. So just to remind you of the couple of house rules and announcements. So please note that all the sessions are being recorded. So I hope everybody's okay with that, but this is for the purposes of our colleagues who cannot join all the sessions. So they will be able to access the exchange and the discussions later on through the website. So all the sessions are being recorded and they'll be uploaded to the website. Please, of course, keep your microphones muted. And if you have the possibility, please turn on your cameras when you're asking a question. For all other times, let's keep the cameras off for those colleagues who are maybe joining from places where internet might not be very good, like my house. So let's try to do it that way. Our session today, like I said, is titled Greening the Response. So the theme of our annual meeting is shelter and settlements in a changing environment. So today, from that title, we will be focusing literally more on the environment side. Of course, we have been doing it also in a couple other sessions last week, and we will still continue exploring this topic. But today, we're looking at, I'm hearing some background noise. But today we are looking at being inspired a little bit and brainstorming and looking at practical ways forward for greening the humanitarian shelter and settlement sector. So we will be looking at how we can do that, of course, without losing effectiveness and performance, of course, or compromising from our work. So how can we green our interventions and still be performing at the same level, if not better. And secondly, we also want to look at how we can forge new partnerships, how we can think differently to reach green objectives, how we can have new approaches and maybe learn from other initiatives to make our responses greener. Okay, thank you, everyone. We are still having a high number of colleagues joining, so please try to make sure the microphones are on mute.
You are on mute right now, Ella.
Okay, I even muted myself. I'm sorry. That was my notebook that fell on my keyboard. So yes, everybody can hear me? Okay, today how we're going to do our session is that we will have 15-20 minutes, a guest who will be inspiring us before we go into breakout groups and put our heads together to look at some concrete questions. So I'm very happy to introduce our keynote speaker for this session. I don't know if she's managed to join. Teres, I hope you're there. So today we will be joined by Teres Marie Upstrom Pankratov from Innovation Norway. She is the head of the Humanitarian Innovation Program at Innovation Norway. so probably her name is quite well known to most of you. The Humanitarian Innovation Program is the program supporting humanitarian organizations in entering into innovative partnerships with private sector. So this is an area, of course, we are really interested in knowing more about and getting more skilled at. So it will be very interesting to hear from Teres on how we can do that better. And also the current focus of the program is on green response, protection, health, and sanitation. So all of these are keywords are very much also related to our sector. So we see a lot of overlaps and opportunities for the shelter and settlements to contribute there as well. Very relevant for all of us. So Teresa is also not a stranger to Geneva and the agencies that we are all working for. She has worked previously for the Permanent Mission of Norway to the UN in Geneva, as well as Norwegian Refugee Council and UNHCR. So she's coming from inside and she knows exactly what we're talking about. So I think that will be an extreme added value. So with that, I leave the floor to Therese and look forward to having her insights on how we can do things differently and learn from innovation processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ella. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I really look forward to hear from all of you actually about your efforts to green your shelter response. Where is there a need for new developments? Where are the stumbling blocks? Where have you seen great advancements? And what are your plans moving forwards? But before that, I've been asked to say a few words, so I will. And to start off and to ensure that we're on the same page, green response is not about saving the environment. It is about reducing harmful impact on the environment and ecosystems resulting from an emergency response. It is about saving lives without risking damage to the livelihoods, health, and survival of affected people. So in fact, it is about doing no harm. It ought to be a core component in any humanitarian response. Yet we're not there yet when we can say that our response is green. It is, however, increasingly in focus. I see many humanitarian organizations have or are developing environmental policies. However, surveys have shown that these are often not consistently implemented or monitored or evaluated. So this is something that we need to work on. We need change, innovations, modernizations, adaptations to how we prepare for, plan, and implement a response. And the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they conducted a needs assessment in 2018 as they were working on their new humanitarian strategy at the time. And in general, Norway has heeded the call from the organizations, and the large majority of our aid is given as unearmarked funding. However, they did find that the organizations needed support and de-risking of the process of entering into innovation partnerships with the private sector. And so together with Innovation Norway, they designed the program that I had today, the Humanitarian Innovation Program. And the program has an annual call for proposals. The 2021 deadline to apply is June 25th. And as Ella said, the program has 4 focus areas. It's green response, protection, cash-based assistance, and health and sanitation. However, we find that many projects span across 2 or more of them. Green response issues often have protection benefits, for examples. So there are strong synergies between environmental issues and the humanitarian objectives. So I thought I'd share a couple of examples of green projects that we have funded. And one of them is Camp Plus, a project led by CARE Denmark, Uganda, and Norway. And the vision of the Camp Plus project is to create the world's first sustainable refugee camp. The aim is to define and test a model. Oh, my computer is acting up and there. Is to test and define a model for a self-sustaining refugee camp that produces sustainable food and clean energy for 120,000 refugees in the Kyangwali refugee settlement. Camp Plus presents a holistic, integrated, and circular approach. Sorry, my computer keeps hiding my notes. So, And by including natural resource management and spatial planning, plastic waste management, sustainable energy for cooking and charging, and a climate-smart agriculture and food production system. So over the 2 years that they've received funding from us, they have partnered with technical experts and been able to develop and implement many of these elements that together become the holistic view of the Camp Plus project. And they are now at a stage when they're taking stock, recording lessons learned, and planning the way forwards. The applications that we received to our call for proposals reveal certain developments and awareness raising in the humanitarian sector. We have, for example, received increasing number of applications on waste management. Last year, we also saw a number of applications on aquaponics and green agriculture. And we saw a shift in the solar application towards the stronger focus on access to energy and not just the energy solutions themselves. It is challenging for us to find the right line to draw between what is innovation and what is modernization. When should we be able to say that something has a strong enough proof of concept in the sector that it no longer qualifies for innovation funding? And how do we ensure that this proof of concept is communicated across the sector so that other actors and organizations can build on it? During the Humanitarian Network and Partnership Week this spring, we gathered all the projects that we fund that address plastic or take a circular approach on waste management for a session where they could share with all of you their efforts. And just within our portfolio of projects, we have about 8 organizations working on this within 5 projects, and they represent most of the largest humanitarian organizations. Thus, a lot of good work from a lot of actors with a sizable impact. These projects include Engineers Without Borders, looking at creating a circular economy model where plastic waste is upcycled to winter insulation material for tents. It includes ICRC, World Food Programme, UNHCR, and the Norwegian Red Cross, looking at how we can replace polypropylene as a packaging material for food and NFIs. It includes a project led by UNHCR looking at creating a circular economy model of plastic waste to school furniture, and a project led by IOM looking at the business model around solar light. Which lamps should we from a sustainability perspective buy? What business models need to be created around repair, recycling, and waste management? And these are all great projects. The pilots are doing good things where they take place, and a lot of very valuable knowledge is being developed. So to return to my question, how do we best ensure that future efforts are built on what has been done? How do we create a replicable model that can be scaled and become part of ordinary programming? And how do we get these efforts funded? But let me take one step back and say a few words about innovation. As Ela said, the Humanitarian Innovation Program is established to de-risk humanitarian private partnerships. And one of the challenges of greening our response is the lack of technical expertise within the organizations. And we see from the applications we receive that the organizations have a clear idea of the benefit of working with the private sector when greening our response. So I thought I'd say a few words about the process we use to establish innovation partnerships. And this process is useful for entering into any strategic partnership, whether innovation is an expected outcome or not. The point of departure for what we all do as humanitarians is a need. We're there to meet needs. And this is the case for greening too. So when looking at greening your response, when you've identified a need, your job is then to learn all you can about that need. And these steps of identifying a need and learning everything you can about it, the needs assessment is something that humanitarians do really well. But from here, a lot of actors tend to jump straight to procurement based on their own technical understanding of a solution that could work. And this is where we ask actors to pause a little. So traditionally, humanitarians have been concerned about speaking with the private sector before conducting a procurement. And this is due to a concern about corruption, and rightly so, because we need to be concerned about that. However, a consequence of this is that procurement can take place based on limited information about the products with the best fit. And so there are frameworks that have been developed to safeguard that there is a fair and open dialogue between the humanitarian sector and the private sector, and to ensure that any procurement is as well informed as possible. And importantly, that scarce funds are being used in the most effective way. In fact, procurement is a vitally important component of everything we do. And if we wish to reach our humanitarian objectives and the SDGs as efficiently as possible, how we procure makes a huge difference. So once you've become an expert on your challenge, do a market analysis and then speak with the market. Invite them to a market dialogue where you present your challenge and you listen to their input. What solutions are out there that could work? Or if a solution does not exist, can you together with other actors develop something new? Based on the outcome of your needs assessment and the market dialogue, then define the outcome you wish from your process, the performance of the solution you're seeking, and procure based on that. By focusing on the performance and not the technical input, and by designing your procurement around the performance, you facilitate a process where both the humanitarian organizations and the supplier get to use their specific competencies. This approach promotes a process where the best solution can be offered instead of limiting the suppliers to the humanitarian organization's assumed best solution. So this was a little bit about the innovation process and how we organize that. And secondly, I'd also like to challenge you a little bit around funding. So a lot of great green solutions have been developed and they've been piloted and we have proof of concept, yet they're not scaled. And when I ask the organizations why, a frequent response that I get is a lack of funding. So you need earmarked funding to scale innovations. However, when donors ask organizations how they would like to receive funding, the response is unearmarked. So how do we find the right balance? The initial investment of going green is holding many organizations back. Replacing diesel generators with solar, for example, is an expensive endeavor. What many might need is some kickstart funding. I hear UNHCR is developing a green fund, and I see NRC has entered into a partnership with the Grieg Foundation to work on a strategy for ensuring the organization becomes carbon neutral and increases its environmental sustainability. And both are great, important initiatives. One of the projects we're funding is a collaboration between NRC and the impact investor Empower New Energy. And the objective of this project is to scale their use of solar. And scaling solar at this stage, I would say, is modernization and ideally ought to be part of ordinary programming and not innovation. But the reason why this project still falls within our family is the collaboration with the impact investor. I'm really eager to see if the sector is able to design projects that might fit the interest of impact investors. And I think within the humanitarian sector, green projects have the highest chance of succeeding at this. Another innovative financing mechanism that is touched upon by our project is carbon offset financing, and I'd be happy to make connections if any of you would like to look into this. So the sector has suffered from underfunding for many years now, and we need to look at new sources of funding. And part of the solution, it must lie in innovative financing in the private sector. And in making this work, I think part of our efforts must be in aggregating our ask. How can you as organizations work better together to develop and scale these green solutions in a way that might attract private sector funding? Ironically enough, or should I say sadly, in spite of our sector being chronically underfunded, many humanitarian projects are too small to interest impact investors. And in aggregating your ask, joining your efforts, you might be able to design projects that will both be extremely well informed as you combine your knowledge and at a size that investors might want to look at. So my intention with these words have been to partially inspire, partially provoke or encourage action and exchange. And I hope I've reached that goal. And I look forward to hear the outcome of your group work. But to summarize, greening the response, it's not a new and added activity humanitarians are taking on. It is part of our obligation to do no harm. And in all your efforts, remember to share your lessons learned, wins and losses, build on what has been done, seek partnership with experts and across organizations, procure well, and most importantly, partner with affected people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Words. I hear myself. Okay, now it's okay. Thank you very much, Therese, for sharing with us some of these thoughts that should actually get us to think a little differently and maybe well, not not to get us out of our comfort zone, but hopefully broaden our comfort zone so we can internalize the thinking that you have mentioned. There are a couple of questions, I think, in the chat. Just let me go through them. One colleague has asked about the projects that you were mentioning, and I think Ingvild, your colleague, has already put them there so everyone can access. I believe that the session that you were mentioning at the HNPW is also available, the recording on the OCHA or HNPW website. It was a very interesting session. Let me see. Okay, I think all of the questions were answered in the chat. So while we want to give our colleagues in the meeting the chance to ask you a couple of questions as well, but while they're thinking about it, I wanted to ask something to you. You actually just mentioned the aggregating the ask was one of the key messages that also a speaker in that session had mentioned, like how the humanitarian sector needs to come together to be an interesting business partner to the other economic stakeholders. I was wondering how you encourage from Innovation Norway side for different applicants, let's say when you see similar projects or looking at maybe the same problem from different areas. How do you encourage the agencies to come together and maybe start talking to one another? Do you have some golden tips for that, for them to take distance from their logos maybe?
Sure. Most effectively, we increase their funding. So projects that apply to us with 3 or more humanitarian organizations coming together can receive a higher budget than projects led by a single organization. So I think that's our most efficient tool. But we also encouraged a lot of learning, so exchanges of learning, and we have meetings. And I really appreciate those meetings because the organizations are very frank and open about all their lessons learned and share with each other. And I see after each time we've had these meetings that they reach out to each other and new collaborations or initiatives are established. So I think there is an eagerness to collaborate across organizations on these issues. It's finding the time and also because it is time consuming to enter into these relationships. It's complicated. It takes time out of our busy days. So it's finding those pockets of time where organizations can meet and discuss. I think is important.
Okay, that's also very much that enabling environment is also something that what we would like to create also within our cluster, and maybe in that sense we could also join hands with our cluster, but also maybe a couple of others to be part of this networking effort that you're doing, so we can also maybe bring our partners to that table for that exchange. So let's also keep the conversation going. Are there any questions from our participants? Is there anyone who would like to take the floor? I see one new message. Yes, shall I read that out to you? I see a question from Isabeau Rix. She's asking, is multi-sectoral integrated approach also a solution for greening our interventions? How do you encourage this? So looking beyond multi-agency, but multi-sectoral. Have you been supporting any initiatives that look at different sectors in the same project as well?
Yes, like I said, a lot of the green projects that we fund are also protection projects. So there is a lot of protection outcome coming out of green projects as well. So I definitely think that an integrated approach is a very good way forwards. I'm not sure if Isabel has some concrete examples or could make the question more concrete.
Isabel, do you want to come online? Because I know you're also doing some work for the joint environmental unit. Maybe you can give a bit more, elaborate a little bit more on the question.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Sorry, I didn't plan to come online, but here I am. So yeah, the question is related because addressing, greening the response will be, I mean, in terms of shelters, will be also beyond only shelter-related intervention. You will have some wash-related issue. You will have some livelihood issues as well. So how do you support this into your approach and your different projects?
Yeah, I think the best tool that we use here is flexibility. So so we look at projects. For our funding, the two key criteria that the project needs to meet is innovation height. Because this is an innovation project, we're ideally looking for solutions that don't exist yet in the humanitarian sector. And then the second one is impact. So that it impacts either a lot of people or that the people impacted are impacted in a significant way. And so these two criteria both open up for multi-sectorial projects. And we see a number of examples of those in the applications that we receive each year.
And do you think that for greening the intervention, having some key indicators where you apply your environmental lens, like the sector-specific indicators, the overall indicators, which are a bit more green, might help to greening the response?
Yeah, I think indicators are essential because we're all really busy people, and if the task is not on our list of indicators, chances are it's going to be overlooked. But I see that more and more of our fellow donors are looking specifically into greening the response. Norway, as a donor, has this on the agenda every time that they meet with the organizations that they fund, and so I think that will also push organizations towards both having these indicators available and using them.
So I guess I'm going to do a bit of promotion here because I'm working for UNAV to develop the virtual environmental field advisor tool, which is a hands-on tool which will be mounted on the IA platform, IA Connect platform. It's a joint initiative with the joint environmental unit in OCHA, to help the humanitarian planning and the humanitarian plan to integrate environmental sensitive indicators in the different sectors. So we have developed the tools and we are under consultation for shelter, wash, livelihood, food security and nutrition. We're aiming to do protection because you mentioned it is quite strong sectors also to take into consideration, and hopefully health, and that will be online. The idea is for the field manager to be able to tag in their different activities so they can really have some key indicators and how to apply and implement their greening response. That's done, of course, using all the existing material. We are not reinventing the wheel here. And the good initiatives which have given some examples. And I'm going to leave it here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to intervene. Yes?
No, I was saying thank you very much, and I'm sure there are colleagues who will be interested in supporting some of the work that you also wanted to consult our sector about. So please also leave your contacts and in the chat so colleagues can reach out to you. I see one or two more questions. We're a little bit over time, but I think it's important. Gustavo is asking, because you mentioned the PP bags initiative that is being supported currently, and he's saying, you have said it's not going to be used for the packing of items, or they're looking at alternative options. I wonder if tarpaulins will be used as well, and if yes, if anything is being done to try to also reduce the polyethylene there. I can also give a reaction to that, but do you have any current projects that looks at the tarpaulin?
No, we're not currently. So I've seen drafts of this project. I know organizations are looking at it. So the project that we are funding is currently at a global level. So they haven't selected their pilot countries yet, and they're looking at these polypropylene bags and not the tarpaulin. But I do know that this is also an issue that's being worked on by the organizations.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Just if I may complement that question, Gustavo, well, the answer rather. There is currently a project to look at the sustainable tarpaulin that's being funded through other sources, but it's a joint initiative between ICRC, UNHCR, and IFRC. I think Amar is also online at the moment. My colleague from UNHCR, we're trying to look at it together. So there are also efforts to look at the plastic content of the tarpaulin and to see if we can do anything to it without, of course, reducing the performance. So many initiatives are going on. Let me see. Okay, there are two more questions. Let me first get the first one from Sobia. I don't know if we'll have time for the second one from Patrick. So Sobia is asking, how can we sensitize the conventional design of concrete shelter and how we potentially create a chaotic hell in the future, especially our integrated wash response, which doesn't look at the... okay, I'm not so sure if you will be able to answer. This is quite specific for the shelter materials. So yeah, maybe we can discuss this in the breakout rooms in a minute. There'll be more focus on going into detail for the shelter response. So let's park this question. And Patrick, our colleague from Afghanistan cluster, is asking, in the field we are faced with maintaining a balance between meeting the goal need of greening our response vis-a-vis responding to humanitarian life-saving needs, especially if it comes with a need for additional funds. At policy donor level, a certain incentive for humanitarian organization to green would help in balancing this. For example, additional funding for green responses. What are your thoughts on this? So the balancing of you said it's not about saving the environment, but that's how it's seen, maybe saving lives versus saving the environment. Some thoughts on that before we break out.
Yeah, sure. Just to address the other question first, I mean, this sounds, the issue of the concrete, it sounds like a good topic for a market dialogue and to listen to what's out there. So maybe that could be a track to follow for that question. Concerning the funding, yes, you know, I really understand that challenge. I went in and just looked at the figures for the shelter response and see that on average, the shelter clusters have been, I think it was 31% funded across the globe this year. It's really hard to balance all these needs. So which is why I wanted to inspire you all a little bit concerning innovative financing, because the whole solution won't be in traditional donors, unfortunately. I wish it could be, but as we see needs increase, even if donors increase their funding, it just doesn't meet all the needs. And so some parts of our response, we need to look into innovative funding and other sources. We need to broaden our funding base. And I think within the issue of green response, there might be opportunities that are harder to find in other parts of our response when it comes to collaborating with the private sector, with impact investors, looking at you know, carbon offset financing or other new ideas. And this is still at an infant stage. We don't have the best models, haven't been developed yet, I believe. And so we need to pilot and test them out. But I think partially the solution needs to be there. And then partially also, like you say, Ella, that environment isn't considered life-saving. like I also said, it is actually about doing no harm, and so we just need to take it in as part of our response and part of our ordinary operations.
Very much agree with that, and I think maybe the new environmental and climate charter that hopefully the agencies will sign up for will also provide that base for thinking about both at the same time. With that, I would like to thank our speaker very much for getting us a bit warm. We warmed up a little bit towards the end with the questions, but hopefully that energy will now translate into the breakout groups. We will have 3 breakout groups who will be moderated by 3 very able colleagues. So we will be, I think, automatically assigned to the groups. The groups will be quite big, so if you want to be heard, please contribute actively. It may not be possible for everyone to take turns, so please be energetic. So we're going to have Kelly, who's very well known, of course, in our cluster, who will be moderating group 1. Charles Parrock will be moderating group 2, and Richard Casagrande from IFRC, who's the focal point for a Green Response Working Group, will take on group 3. All of the groups will be working in the same way, and we will be looking at 3 groups of questions: the easy wins, the hard wins, and I think what is the third one? I forgot now, but there will be key issues for each category, and you will be able to vote so that we know what has the highest priority for us. And then we will be coming back to the plenary to discuss and to compare notes to see if we agree on where we need to focus our efforts. So with that, yes, we will have to use the Jamboard. So that's the connection to the link to the Jamboard. I think we will also put it in the chat for people to access. And what did you put? Okay, Kelly just put in a comment in the chat. So with that, I think we can break into our groups. Anything else, Miguel, that I forgot to mention, or our dear moderators?
No, this is perfect. I think you explained everything. We will put a clickable link in the chat, but you can paste that and put it in your browser. So we will go in the rooms very soon. Thank you.
The rooms are beginning. I'm going to try to see what happened to people. Hello, can you hear me? People who are still with me in the plenary? Hello, can you hear me? Hi. Hello there. Are you still with us in this meeting? Hello, do you hear? Namula, are you still with us? Hello, can you hear me? Hi, Musa. So we're currently in breakout rooms, so I'm going to add you to one of the ongoing discussions. I think they have about 15 more minutes, okay? I'm moving you.
Hello, I was disconnected while participating in one of the rooms. So
Okay.
how can I find it again?
Okay, I'm trying to find how to add you. So I'm able to move Musa for some reason. So is your connection bad? Which room were you in?
I'm not sure why I was disconnected, frankly, but the connection seems to be good here. I don't know.
Okay, so which room were you in? Do you know which? Do you know which room you were in, so you can rejoin, so I can try to help you?
No, actually, I didn't catch any of the names of the persons there.
So there's room 1, room 2, room 3.
Yeah, that
Oh,
was.
I see where you are. Okay, hold on 1 second. Let me try.
The Jamboard.
Okay, 1 second.
So,
I'm trying to fix it. So
I
it
can
says
see
you're
the
not.
Jamboard.
Okay, that's weird. Oh wait, now I got you. So you were in group 2, I think. So now I think I can move you back.
Yes.
Okay, moving you.
Thank you.
See if it works.
Thank you.
It says moving. Adriana, we're currently in the last few minutes of breakout rooms. I'm just going to add you to an ongoing conversation.
Can't hear you, Charles. You're muted.
So sorry.
So I'd like to
that
thank.
was, I don't know.
I'd like to thank
Go on.
everybody in Group 1. We all got thrown out before we said goodbye. Bye.
Oh, and I'd like to thank everybody in Group 2 because we just got thrown out and I got muted when I came back into the meeting. Right. But we can still write on the Jamboards, apparently, and I've asked my Group 2, to continue to write into the Jamboards so that, and hopefully in time for us to be able to present back to plenary.
Our problem was the Jamboard got so jammed that we didn't capture everything people wanted to.
Is that why it's called a Jamboard?
Apparently. But we have some points that we can summarize.
So I will share the screen with the Jamboard of Group 1. Kelly, if you would like to summarize a bit some of the key highlights.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm just trying to look at everybody look at these things a little bit. So in terms of the low-hanging fruits, obviously there's a lot that is already being done. And I just lost it. There we go. There's a lot that's being done. And one of the things is highlighted here is to connect with the donors who may already be doing social impact assessments and other organizations who are already doing things, and share information between those organizations. These are easy kinds of things to do. And also the training. And one of the things is the information products, including green information in those awareness raising products. So there's a lot of easy things here, and I'm sure we'll identify more as we go along. The hard wins, plastic sheeting, asbestos, which is something we've been dealing with for several years already. Alternative technologies, there are a lot of alternative technologies out there, but figuring out how to get them to actually be accepted and used by the affected population has turned out to always be a challenge. There needs to be more thinking about that. And then using that approach to offset harmful building practices, for instance, using fired bricks when there are alternatives. These kinds of things take a long-term commitment, and that's a challenge that the sector has always been facing. And then we have the unknowns. Some of the issues about, I would say some of the issues here about unknowns are unknown because people don't know about what might have been done elsewhere, such as phasing out facilities. There's guidance on that, and there's a need to coordinate with others. So some of the things that we don't know, other sectors may know, for instance, camp management. And there needs to be a greater emphasis on the long-term wins, as Teresa mentioned, basically looking at the environment as a positive element of improving the overall humanitarian response. Thanks a lot. Miguel is going to summarize all these things, so if I missed anything, it'll show up a little bit later, or if you have comments, send him something in the chat. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Kelly. So we will move now to group number 2.
Thanks,
Charles?
everybody. Yep, great. Thanks, everybody. Really interesting session, and a lot of actual very specific things that we can move on. We identified a number of, we identified the priorities, and what I'm going to move on to, there were some of the some overlaps with some of the things that Kelly's talked about. Biodiversity was mentioned, deforestation was mentioned. I really like the idea of planting trees next to shelters, but the ones that got through, and this is on page 5 of the Jamboard, if you want to navigate over to that, was learning from local building practices, which usually take into account sustainability issues. And this is, of course, for those of you who are aware, this is something that Crater, somebody who've been contributing to the Global Shelter Cluster, have been doing, and they are great experts in this, and they have already done a number of contextual analyses in a number of countries. So we have some specific calls to action, which are in pink on this Jamboard if you're looking at it, which is research and development. Yes, of course, I'm in research, so I would, of course, support that. Creating a platform for knowledge, absolutely. I mean, we know the knowledge is out there. We know specialist knowledge is out there, but it's about getting hold of it. Project strategies taking into account pillars of sustainability. There's not quite an action, but maybe we turn it into an action by saying that we must develop a way of including those pillars of sustainability in project strategies. The typology, making the typology the same as existing communities. Well, that's, again, we need to formulate that into an action. How do we do that when we're doing a response? Yes, assess the local building practices, better assess how. We need to find that how, probably to take the criteria work as a way forward. Scientific validation of local practices, I completely agree that we need to know whether they actually work or not, because sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're not very helpful. The second one, so we've got 3 priorities here. The second one is part of the hard wins. Become part of the economic and business models and incentives instead of working alongside of them. I think that's really important. So, and the action is there, find out someone who can help us understand models, things like carbon credits, organize a meeting, so we could do those 2 in 1, to find people who can help us understand and then meet them, and then conduct assessments at country level to be able to give us some data about that. And then the third one, which we got, was recycle plastic waste to make a frame. This is an okay environmental solution because there is plastic waste in a country, and to develop that into something which doesn't become polluting because it becomes a waste product, then it becomes a useful product, is an interesting strategy. It could be the subject of a bid to the Norwegian Innovation Fund. That would be a very interesting way to go ahead with that. So those are our 3 priorities, and we have some action to propose to the shelter cluster, and thank you.
Thanks a lot, Charles. So we will move then to the group of Richard, group number 3. I think this is the slide, right, Richard?
That's the one, the jammed looking Jamboard. Yes, we had a few technical issues in the first few minutes as well, getting people on the Jamboard, but we got there eventually. I'm not sure I've had time to order a lot of this, but let me just go through some of the fruit basket first of all, the low-hanging fruit. Of course, the issue of avoiding international procurement and trying to promote more local procurement and more locally sourced sustainable materials. It's not always cut and dried, though, of course. International procurement is not always more environmentally sustainable, but often there's a sense that local is greener. The question on the tarps and shelter materials in general that are leading to environmental degradation with a high carbon content. Obviously, the tarpaulins come up there. So there's quite a few suggestions there. Obviously, the initiatives here are already underway, as we heard, about an eco-design for the tarpaulin, partnering more with research institutions, technical universities, in order to make that happen, and also mainstreaming the tarpaulin guidance note further throughout the global shelter cluster by translating into different languages. We also have, under the known unknowns, a related one. It was a point that Xavier brought up. It's probably in the known unknowns because it's a difficult piece of research to do, but what really happens to the tarpaulins at their end of useful life? How are they disposed of? What happens after the operation, after the camp, after the displacement finishes? And I guess we really don't know enough about that. And in order to understand, the life cycle impact of a tarpaulin, it's going to be important to understand what's really happening to them. We also had the question of the debris here on the left-hand side. I'm still in the low-hanging fruits here. And of course, solution there, how can we use the debris, the innovative construction techniques to reuse debris in basic infrastructure, foundations, retention walls, and all the rest. Now, I know this is not a new topic for many of you, but perhaps how can we scale this up by working more with construction companies or the private sector to take it to scale? We also had here the need for better collaboration between the shelter sector and the environmental sector and the environmental experts. So it's not necessary to reinvent the wheel or for shelter people to become technical experts, but seems to be a sense that we need to partner better with the environmental sector and make use of that advice. And finally here, the point on better water management in shelter and settlements planning, drainage, rainwater capture and all the rest. So really promoting, the solution here is to really promote nature-based solutions in the design of shelter. Green roofing, retention ponds, making sure that systems are in place for community-based management and maintenance of all of that. Moving quickly to some of the harder wins here, the local solutions. How do we encourage local solutions instead of bringing in plastics, and understanding better, harnessing the knowledge of local organizations, and validating the local practices? How can we influence manufacturers of the emergency shelter and household items to actually change the manufacturing process and make it more green, changing the actual chemical composition? So I think the point there is to work on eco-design for tarpaulins and other household items. It really needs to be in partnership with the private sector, with the big suppliers. Tree planting came up in both low-hanging fruits and the hard wins. That tree planting and ecosystem restoration should be part of the settlement response, but how to make that happen? And so in the low-hanging fruits, there's a suggestion of partnering with FAO and linking in livelihoods and tree planting initiatives. But in the harder wins, it's more about how do we influence donors to actually fund something like tree planting as part of a wider shelter response, and perhaps as part of compensating for the carbon footprint of the operation. And finally, the known unknowns. I already mentioned understanding what really happens to tarpaulins at the end of useful life. The circularity question. How do we work towards circularity of shelter and settlements programs? How do we learn better from the private sector? I guess this is not a new topic. And ecosystems restoration is part of exit strategy from a shelter and settlements response. I'm getting into small type here, but what else can I see here? The long-term impact of shelter responses on local environments. So raising the question of environmental impact evaluations. Obviously, we're struggling to understand environmental impact assessments and where they fit. So this is going a step beyond that and actually thinking really of how do we evaluate the long-term impact. And finally, last but not least, the problem where we're not even utilizing the existing tools that we have when making design decisions. And I'll better stop there and hand back to you, Miguel. Thank you to the third group.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thanks to everyone for this facilitation of the breakout rooms, and everyone for their patience while we got the technology to work. So I think, Ella, I will hand over now to you to facilitate a discussion between Therese and any reaction from Therese or any reactions from the participants. Is that okay?
It's okay. Therese, I am not so sure if she could stay until the end, but are you still with us? It may be that
yes,
she.
I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, you're here. Great.
I wasn't able to unmute, but I'm here.
Okay, great. No, I just wanted to check with you if anything came up as something surprising from the small feedback of the breakout groups, and whether yeah, so your initial thoughts, whether we were in the right direction or whether we were again falling into the trap of coming up with a solution and finding the way to implement that solution. So how can we do this as a next step?
Sure. No, thank you so much for having me. It's really useful for me to hear where are your needs and where do you see the need for more efforts. I hear your call for the tarpaulin issue being addressed and look forwards to see the outcome of the project that I know you're working on concerning that. I also hear the importance of localization and making that work well. I heard the call for tree planting, so if anyone's interested in that, they can take a look at our webpage. We do support a project currently with UNHCR in Sudan. It's a cooperation with a private sector company or a social entrepreneur, actually called Land Life Company, and that are doing tree planting. It seems to me that the way that you organized your challenges in low-hanging fruits and hard wins, that all the hard wins require partnership, and the low-hanging fruits are issues that you can address yourself. And so just a continued call and encouragement to make that effort of making these partnerships work. I know it's a lot of work, but I think it's worth the effort. So yeah, so that's just some initial comments.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Indeed, partnerships is something that we also would like to advance on, not just around this issue, but also with many other things. Also, tomorrow we have a session on the multi-sectoral impact of shelter. So we're also looking at partnering across the sectors to address some of these issues, because some of those things that our colleagues have raised clearly have also they would resonate also with maybe other sectors, CCCM or WASH and all that. So I think we need to realize that we're not alone, and we need to maybe spend a bit more time on investing in the relationships and the partnerships and as a cluster to enable this environment for the conversation to take place. Even just in the chat, we made some connections with different agencies working on different aspects of the same topic. So thank you very much for your initial thoughts, and also, of course, joining us. Does anybody else have a reflection or an insight to add to what we have just heard? Okay, hang on. I will look at the. I think it's Patrick. Patrick, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to just dig a bit deep into this issue of plastic sheets, because as you know, in our humanitarian responses, whichever country we go into, a very high proportion of the plastic sheeting that is in that country is delivered by humanitarian organizations. So from my point of view, I think with respect to environmental degradation, as shelter cluster, that is the main issue, the main culprit here. And also, if you look at it from the point of view of emergency responses, I think all of you will agree that this is a vital item that we need, especially considering that we don't have enough time to check and assess the local solutions that are available when we have these emergencies cropping up. As in usual settings, you'll find these populations rarely use these plastic sheets. So it's purely humanitarians that come in with this. Many countries are already replacing plastic bags with alternative options. So it's good news to hear that there are already some innovative solutions that are being done towards getting an alternative to this. And also from another perspective, we can also see if there are ways of recycling them, if we cannot be able to find an alternative solution or have the two going hand in hand, you know, and an alternative solution that is environmentally friendly, and also ways of retrieving these ones that we have distributed and recycling them. As you heard, one of the members had mentioned that where do these items go to once they have been distributed? Yeah, so these are my comments, and it would be good also for the benefit of the members here if we can hear from colleagues on what is the progress being done on identifying these alternative solutions to plastic sheeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for your intervention. I think, I mean, from our side, I only know the project that we are involved in, of course. It's just at the starting blocks, actually, the tarpaulin, sustainable tarpaulin project. So looking at the entire life cycle analysis is a big part of the project. It's also a 2 to 3 year trajectory. So we really would like to take the time to look at all aspects of it. So I think it's I can say that it's included in the planning of the project, but of course we will need support and partnerships to get the full picture. So that's what I can say from my side. Other colleagues who are of course involved in different projects looking at the plastic and the tarpaulin could chip in, or maybe through the chat. I'm also mindful of the time. So I saw, so if you have anyone, if you have any contributions on that specific question of plastic and end of life and recycling and waste management, please add in the chat. I want to give also the floor to Kelly. I see your hand. I think you'd like to share some of your reflections with us. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Ella. One thing that I think a lot of the comments that were made in the different sessions are excellent and will become a very good list that we can use to move forward. But I also am sort of, it's not so much a caution as a comment that should not be considered critical, but we also need to start taking a longer term view of the humanitarian response. Plastic's an issue, plastic sheeting is obviously an issue, but there are lots of other things out there, and we need to keep an idea of the whole overview of the session of what we're dealing with here. And some of those things that have already underway, for instance, environmental advisors, I think the ICRC project, or the ECHO project is looking at having environmental advisors, but also some of the other things that can be done before a disaster, such as planning and mapping out what are the opportunities within a country, are really necessary so that we take a longer term view of how we respond to disasters. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that contribution, because it also made me think that I forgot to mention exactly what you said. Of course, we have been lucky to secure some support from ECHO as the Global Shelter Cluster to look in more detail into these challenges. And part of it is, of course, it was a big gap, this question of having the right kind of expertise and knowledge to guide us through the different moments of making a decision, right? It's a bit unknown for our sector. So hopefully we will have some additional dedicated expertise quite soon through our partners to help us guide through these different and difficult moments of focusing on the priorities. And also, of course, our grant proposal, well, the project is looking at what can be done before and during. So I think that preparedness phase, also what our partners are doing, as Secretary is doing with the local building practices and also environmental profiles, we're also trying to get some mileage in already in the preparedness phase, so that long-term vision that you mentioned can be taken into account. We're not there yet, but hopefully we're moving in the right direction. So I don't see any other hands. I'd like to thank Therese very much, of course, for being with us and staying the whole time and to listen to our thinking. And I hope that we'll be able to have many more occasions to exchange ideas with the cluster, but also with our partners and hopefully with new partners as well. With that, I'd like to hand over to Brett. I hope you're there, Brett. Yes, I think. Oh, okay. It's Miguel who's sharing the screen. I'd like to hand over to Brett for his closing remarks and also to tell us what's waiting for us in the days to come. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Ella. Thanks a lot. And thanks everyone for participating in the session. Just a quick thanks to our speaker from Innovation Norway, Therese, for the key comments that she gave there. You know, really some important things there around looking at greening as something that should be part of our core business and should not be seen as a particularly new activity. There's a lot of things that are already going on, and to make sure that we kind of frame this through a process of responsible engagement. And Therese also mentioned that, you know, there are some costs involved in greening when we look at issues of, say, replacement of generators and so forth. But so to factor these issues into longer term program cycle and approaches, but also that even with solar, it can hardly be thought of as a emerging technology, that all the implementation of work should really be including solar aspects. I think it was also good to note when Therese mentioned around aggregating our ask, that the sum of the parts, which is really a main function of the cluster, where we work together and work collectively, that's where we can get some action. Just on the side from what Ella mentioned and Kelly as well around the ECHO project that we have. So we'd like to thank and acknowledge ECHO as well for awarding, it's around €640,000 to the cluster to pursue and make progress on a range of integrated issues around greening the response. There's a lot of upstream issues that we were speaking about, what happens in our preparedness phase through our kind of standard stocks of emergency shelter items, looking at their specifications. Now, they're being done on an item by item basis, and one of the first activities really will be around getting a sense of where improvements can be made and how. And I know in UNHCR that they've been working the last couple of years that we've done around modifying the specifications for some of the core relief items, for sleeping mats, for blankets and so forth. And even with those very, very small modifications, we can get really great outcomes that save hundreds of thousands of tons in terms of, you know, not using virgin plastic ingredient, saving on water in the production process. So there's a lot of elements there that are already happening, but it's around cataloging that, understanding the size and the shape of the issue we're confronting, and really, you know, acknowledging the fact that when we look at the entire inventory of non-food items, around 82% is shelter related. Tents, tarpaulins, many other items constitute the bulk in terms of plastic content, in terms of weight, in terms of cost of our emergency response. Also, thanks very much to Kelly, Charles, and Richard for moderating the breakout groups. They each gave really good summaries. We could see a lot of content there on the Jamboard, and I think it'd be good, you know, once we summarize that and include this all in the proceedings of the Global Shelter Cluster meeting, we'll have a clear idea and be able to categorize some of these issues. But broadly, we've got a set of issues which I've kind of, you know, summarized as context issues and then research and outreach issues. I think the context issues are important, and Patrick kind of mentioned that within his examples from Afghanistan. When we're working in urban contexts, when we're working in rural or camp-based contexts, when it's a protracted crisis, when it's a rapid response, natural disaster, we've each got different possibilities and avenues as entry points. As you know, and Alice said in the introduction, the theme of the meeting, you know, is shelter in a changing environment. And when we're concentrating on the green side of things, it's very important to look across the whole life cycle of our interventions and our response, from the beginning, the emergency, protracted right through to some longer term outcomes where possible. So in this way, the nexus issues are very important. Working out what is primarily the responsibility of emergency shelter practitioners and what rests with others in terms of expertise. So understanding that whole kind of program cycle and where our activities are injected along that. I think that there was quite a bit of mention too of the remedial actions. And when I mean the remedial actions, I mean those as opposed to the preventative actions. So the remedial actions around reforestation or reuse, recycling, upcycling of the plastic products, it is happening, but it's happening sporadically, and we certainly have quite a bit of research there. And I think localization is critical as well. And how do we look at that in terms of a preparedness action? You know, of course, it is having good intelligence and oversight of the market and functioning within the local context, making sure that there's tenders, making sure that there's frame agreements in place so you can transition to more sophisticated local procurement processes, but also acknowledging that that may not always get the best environmental outcomes. So there needs to be that needs to be done in a fairly analytical and educated way. So they're the kind of context issues. In terms of the research and outreach element, it absolutely requires collaboration and partnerships, as has been noted throughout the meeting. There's a lot of knowledge out there in terms of the private sector within the realms of engineering, architecture, and there's a lot of expertise out there that should be utilised. We have to be careful how we try to apply that to humanitarian context, but there's certainly a lot of scope to do so. Our engagement with manufacturers, I spoke about that, and that really is with the responsibility of the key agencies who do the bulk procurements as well, to make sure that there's enough upstream advocacy and lobbying and co-creating and solutions with the manufacturers. So I think I'll kind of leave my closing comments there, and maybe can we go to the final slide, just mentioning the next session this afternoon and then the follow-up sessions tomorrow, if we have a slide for that. I don't know if we have one, Miguel, but we do have BHA doing an open space session later this afternoon. I think it's at 5 p.m. Is that correct? I'm pretty sure it's 5 p.m. So just to make sure that everyone can be available for that. And then we've got another, yes, open space today, tomorrow, yeah, sorry, this afternoon, 4 o'clock open space 3 on construction contracts, 5 o'clock with the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, giving an overview of their priorities. Tomorrow, we've got Women in Shelter session at 1 o'clock, and then our next thematic session on the multi-sector impacts of shelter from 2 to 3, followed by another networking session and another open space at 5 o'clock tomorrow. So thanks everyone for being available, participating, sharing your thoughts and your energy. Thank you to our facilitators and presenters, and hope everyone has a good afternoon, and we'll see many of you shortly for the next session. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye.